Welcome, everyone, to this webinar on the Private Investment in Culture Survey for 2025. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Sophia Woodley. I'm Head of Policy Research at the Audience Agency. I have short, dark hair, pale skin, glasses, and I'm wearing a navy blue top. Just a few housekeeping notes before we start off. As you will see, we have interpreters available. There will be a short break just before noon. And this webinar will be recorded and it will be available on the Arts Council website afterwards. So if you want to catch up or share with your friends, it will be there. Thanks so much for joining. I will pass across to Patrick to introduce the session.
Thanks very much, Sophia. So I'm Patrick Town. I'm the Director of Creative Economy at the Audience Agency, and it's my pleasure to present the findings of this research to you and also to help host, along with Sophia and colleagues from Arts Council, a discussion and look at what the consequences or what some of the actions may be coming out of these findings. I'm losing my brown hair and have orange and transparent glasses, a kind of goatee beard, and one of those stripy blue and white tops that looks like a French onion seller. I'm going to pass across to Helen and Claire to introduce the session, as they're the people who commissioned this research.
Hello. Welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for joining today. It's very exciting for us as we present the findings of this rather extraordinary long-term piece of research. It's been going for some years now, so there's some continuity and there's also some newness. So just a bit about me first. I'm Helen Cooper. I'm Senior Manager Philanthropy at Arts Council England. I'm a white, middle-aged woman with dark hair pulled back, tortoiseshell glasses, a white t-shirt, some necklaces around, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm going to hand over to Claire first to talk about our enterprise and innovation team, our investment principle dynamism. Then you'll come back to me for a little bit about what I thought about the report, and then over to others.
Good morning, I'm Claire Titley, Director of Business Innovation and Philanthropy at Arts Council. I'm a white female in my late 40s with fair hair, and I'm wearing a camel-coloured cardigan and I have a dark blue background. So my experience before joining Arts Council has been within fundraising, working with major donors, trusts and foundations, companies in arts and culture, and also international development. I am a trustee of the Bristol and Western Hospitals charity, and so I bring varied experience, and I know how hard it can be to work in fundraising. Our philanthropy work at Arts Council sits very firmly within the Enterprise and Innovation Directorate. The work we do is absolutely linked to our 10-year strategy, Let's Create, and the dynamism investment principle around greater collaboration, diversifying income streams and business models to help sustain the sector. The current delivery plan includes supporting a fit for the future cultural sector as a theme and where this work is grounded. It's worth clarifying the role at Arts Council is not about raising funds for Arts Council, but it's about supporting the sector to get better at raising those funds from private sources, contributed income element, individuals, trust foundations and business. And we do that in a number of ways. We frequently work collaboratively, both internally, externally, on projects that support income development, access to alternative sources of finance, or developing new mechanisms that support the sector. One way we do this is through support of our investment principal organisations, such as Cause for Arts Fundraising and Philanthropy, to help build capacity in the sector, the Association of Cultural Enterprises to help grow income, and we also work with Figurative Philanthropy for Arts and Culture, which seeks to develop place-based partnerships and administer the Arts and Cultural Impact Fund, providing loan finance. To help drive growth in this area, we're collaborating with the wider philanthropic sector and commissioning research such as this in one way to help inform our own programme development, support you in your work, and make the case to government. I'm going to hand back to Helen, and we'll hear from others in this webinar. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Claire. I really am grateful to so many people who have contributed to this piece of research. And we're really pleased to share these key findings. So firstly, I just want to give my thanks to the Audience Agency, MyCake and ETIC Lab, who formed the consortia of partners who produced the research and worked with so many individuals across the sector through a range of different formats, including focus groups and the survey itself. Huge thanks to our guest speakers today, Michelle Gale and Rosa Corbishley, who along with many others also contributed to the report. And we are very grateful to the advisory group members too, who steered the development of the research throughout. The report itself highlights the interconnectivity of different types of funding across the sector, including how public funds can be deployed to leverage in other funding and how different financial models could shape future development of income sources. So I wanted just to draw attention to a little something, a big something actually, from the report that really struck me. So the levels of funding really highlight how the sector is clearly working incredibly hard to develop income beyond and including public funding. However, the contributed income aspect is not having as great an impact as before, and this is probably due to the ongoing increase in the cost of producing and presenting creative and cultural activities. This has a huge impact, and we understand and recognise how difficult things are. So we do really want to signpost you to the array of support that Claire mentioned before through our work with Cause for the Arts Fundraising and Philanthropy Programme and Figurative and others. So now to hand over to everyone else to hear from their practice. And I think, Patrick, that means it's back to you.
I think it does.
I just want to put in one note before handing over to Patrick that I forgot about, which is that although we are doing a webinar rather than a meeting, we do want your input. You should see a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you move your mouse down there. If you have questions at any time, please submit them, and we will have a period at the end of the session where we and the panel will address your questions. So please keep them coming. We want to hear what you're curious about, what you're thinking about, and where you see potential for future research. With that, I will hand over to Patrick.
Great. So it's a very long report, and we could spend the whole of this time just going through, but I'm going to assume that you have read or are going to zoom out from this Zoom to read afterwards the report itself. So as Helen has started to do, I'm going to just take a walking tour through what is a large piece of research. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants. There's 3 previous reports which have wrestled with this rather complex problem to find out what's happening with this kind of investment. And then to complicate things further, as with the previous report, it was a rather turbulent 3 years. So this 21-22 period had still quite a lot of pandemic in both the business world, our private lives, and in policy and funding. And we'll see as we go through that did have quite an impact. To get this picture, we had to pull on lots and lots of different sources of data. So Sarah and colleagues at MyCake worked with Charities Commission, Companies House, 360 Giving, and NPO reporting data, and colleagues at ETIC Lab did amazing work, validated and trained by humans. but to help fill in the gaps where there was some of the data was missing around the financial mix of certain organisations. We then had a very healthy response to our survey. In fact, as we've been mentioning, the dynamism investment principle, Sarah, Sophia, and I have some history in that, because we did the original research with Arts Council on the resilience idea of resilience in the sector, and that had a similarly kind of fulsome number of responses to the survey. Sophia's been leading on the case studies, and indeed we'll be doing an interview with Michelle later as one of those. And then we did 5 different workshops where we had amazing conversations, and that very much informed not just findings from the workshop, but the workshop's interpretations of what we were finding from the other data. So there's talk in many of these reports about the golden triangle of these 3 fundamentally different kinds of income. The earned income, it's focus of the Association of Cultural Enterprises, the enterprise kind of bits of organisations, whether or not they have separate companies set up to do that, or they do it within their core charity. We have public funding of lots of different kinds and from lots of different places, not just Arts Council. And then the focus of this report was the kind of gifting and memberships and sponsorships and partnerships and non-public grants, non-public sector grants from trusts and foundations. But this isn't about private commercial investment, in case there's any doubt. And indeed, the whole area of debt finance is not included within this report. So across this period, a downward trend in government funding for culture, COVID-19, a kind of series of crises which caused inflation, and in particular things around living costs, energy costs, some quite significant political shifts, which we were wondering whether they did affect things, and I think the research, particularly the workshop, showed that they were affecting the kind of weather within the fundraising and philanthropy. And then individual giving in decline, and a very small proportion of individual giving going to culture as a broad kind of umbrella. And as we'll see, not a withdrawal of trust and foundation funding, quite the reverse, but it becoming much more competitive to get it, and a shift towards them requiring much more evidence of impact, and it being much more about outcomes than activity. But we knew we'd have some graphs here, so this is the first of a few. Sarah and her team did their best to find the biggest possible set of organisations that you could analyse, and this was painstaking work, looking at Charities Commission and other data sets, and that's a very large cohort, 7,223 to be exact. And this top level picture looks quite rosy. We've got income going up, we've got contributed income similarly going up, but as we explain in the report, and as I'll briefly explain now, and I'm sure Sarah can expand on this when we have our panel in a minute, when you realise that there are 15 organisations with 35 million turnover each, these organisations are in an entirely different situation, and they skew the figures. And so this is one of the things where we have to be careful about who you're looking at and what conclusions you draw. So these had extraordinary growth in income and even more extraordinary growth in contributed income over the period. And so for that reason, and also because Claire and Helen needed us to do analysis, dividing up trends across the years, doing some quite detailed analysis, the remainder of the report and the remainder of what I'll say today applies to this. Half of those organisations, 3,500, have accounts for all of the separate years, and we can do a much more detailed analysis on them. And so here we have a background of quite high inflation, specific costs, building costs, energy costs, but also that feeding through into wages generally in the economy, feeding through into wages in the sector, but also putting cost pressures on the family wallet in terms of disposable income. And so everyone has grown their income overall and have grown their contributed income, the red, but it's no good just looking at that when you have this high inflation environment, because the costs are in most cases going up quicker. But what you can see across this period, rather tumultuous period, was a recovery 21-22 to 22-23, where keeping the contributed going when we were potentially quite financially distressed in that second year, and then maintaining a growth in the last financial year. That's quite an achievement. But because of the growth in the black bits across the whole period, if we look top right, that's grown 22%. It means that what's happened is that there has been, as Helen mentioned, an extraordinary amount of effort into making the contributed income grow, and that has matched more or less exactly the amount by which the costs increased over the income. And indeed, again, Sarah's the financial whiz here, but there might be a reason for that, which is that if that hadn't been achieved, then organisations would have run out of money. So there's something about, there was a certain amount of stretchiness in the system to cope with those increased costs, but I think, and we don't have qualitative data on the quantitative data on this, but we do have qualitative, the sense that that stretchiness, there isn't any more of that stretchiness. Again, here, what we can see is the red is contributed income, and what's going on largely is that that's stable. The other bits in blue are those changes are largely COVID grants in 21-22, whether it's from trusts and foundations, whether it's from CRF or other kinds of government money. And then what we see is in year 2 and year 3, that reverting back to the normal mix. And again, in the first year, earned income would have been depressed. Certainly at the Audience Agency, we had figures showing a very, very slow return to live events by certain cohorts, perhaps the older visitors. Averages are dangerous. So if we look at this previous slide, we've got this idea of a mix 17, 25, 58 across contributed, public and earned. But when we divide up, there are very different models going on, and that's one of the things that I think we'll discuss today, and certainly came up in the discussions in the workshops, is that no one is the average. The sector is made up of very, very different business models. And that's one of the biggest conclusions, I think. And we hope that this has quite significant implications for the sector support organisations, the investment principal support organisations, and others, policymakers, Arts Council and others, in thinking about how to support organisations. Because as you can see, the mix in these different kinds of business models varies extremely. And this is another view on these different kinds of business models. We've got the contributed dominant, where the private investment is the dominant income. They tend to be really quite small, and we've probably all worked with some of those. They tend to be often with a lot of volunteers. They have a very small turnover. They could be focused on managing a building or doing certain kind of community activities. The public dominant are larger, and indeed there's the next cohort down, which have got quite a balanced mix of income. And again, we've probably all worked with organisations that are 5, 6, 7, 800,000 pounds turnover. Once you get into the earn dominant, they tend to be bigger organisations, and they represent quite a big chunk of the overall turnover of the sector. And then the ones which have got a mixed business model, income model, but where the contributor is low, that's partly because what's tended to drive the growth is their earned income, although they may also have significant amounts of public income, so the contributed is a lower as a proportion. And again, Sarah may want to pick up on this in more detail, but the mix heavily depends. The funding mix heavily depends on what size you are. So the major organisations, question chicken or egg, whether they are major because they have lots of earned income, or they become major because of their earned income. But certainly there is a very strong correlation between the larger you get, the greater the earned income as a proportion. The small ones are a bit of an outlier here because their turnover is so tiny. They really operate on quite a different model. So this is going into a bit more detail into just the private income. And so we're seeing this quite significant growth in trusts and foundations, which is an interesting point, because all the qualitative evidence is that it's more difficult to get the money, but it isn't that there is less of it. It's because it's more competed. The individual suffered. We think we don't have absolute evidence, but because of a lot of people being financially distressed due to cost of living, and so that excuse me, overall growth in individual giving is actually less than inflation. So that's a real term reduction. And the companies, yes, that's gone up somewhat, but it has kind of barely kept in line with inflation. And we'll come back to what the sector thinks about this split in a minute. Again, we've got some regional variations here. London does tend to be an outlier, and let me just double check. I think there was one other thing I was going to say about this area. It's just that the north and southwest tend to have their mid-range in the contributed income, and then you've got the Midlands as lowest. We don't have absolute knowledge of why that is. I think that this is one of the areas that we discussed with Claire and Helen of further work. You can look at kind of concentration of industries and look at the kind of demographics of people. I say look at the business population and look at the people population in those areas, and that might be some of the main causes. And here again, these are very, in some cases, quite different between sectors, and theatre clearly sells a lot of tickets, not all theatres, but lots of theatres. Combined of visual arts, music, dance, performance, all of those things selling tickets. But again, I think we'd encourage people to look more carefully, because oftentimes the biggest factor is the size of the organisation rather than the art form. So what were the barriers encountered? Slowing economy or economic challenges, I think I've already mentioned 4 or 5 times, and certainly in all the research everyone mentioned it, and increased competition. But there is this, and Helen mentioned capacity building, there is this lack of in-house time, resources, skills, knowledge, that general area. And certainly in all the workshops that we did, we had fascinating conversations where there were people who were newer to fundraising and people who were more experienced, and there were always this brilliant interchange of ideas and experience. So we think that there is something in there, clearly it's a barrier, and there are some kind of clear ways to address that barrier. Whether it's due to the pandemic or whether it's kind of various other kind of political policy factors that are coming in this rather turbulent time, clearly there are some shifting priorities, and there's some other things more on the kind of tools, systems, CRM, donor management, ticketing, those kinds of systems, and lack of kind of the bottom 3 are all different kinds of lack of strategy or governance involvement. And again, there's some concrete ideas that came out. Here, these are highlighted as opportunities, but I think they're what people want and their priorities, and some of them are opportunities. So we kind of coloured them up a bit. So people's focus and their attention is directed towards individual donations, trusts and foundations, and sponsorship, basically raising more money. And you can see that's an interesting prioritization that's been made. Not sure I can disagree with it, but it's not clear how much more availability there is of funds from those 3. The other things come out of specific opportunities or requirements to demonstrate value, work with organisations outside the cultural sector but which are not for profit, and then this broader idea of kind of reaching a greater range of people, and to summarise and draw to a conclusion, when we, Sophia and I, spoke to the almost 80 people, there was this sense of some of the old model not working, having to raise money in different ways, that whatever the label of EDI was not necessarily being the route to funding, and people in some cases reframing what they're doing. For all that mission-wise it was still EDI, but we know that to different funders you have to frame things, make the ask be different in different cases. A very, very, very strong sense of data and evidence-driven cases being absolutely essential, and and the drive, the requirement to have better data being really quite extreme. This advisory group idea, so not expecting your board to help you with your fundraising strategy, because they've probably got quite a lot of else going on, just being a board. So having an advisory group that doesn't have to worry about being a trustee, but can actually help you with that. AI questions, people unsure about it, sense that some people are using it well, and they're worried that some people may be left behind if they're not using it, but still some ethical concerns. As I said, in the workshops, even those workshops were peer learning, and I think there clearly was some demand for more of that, and a willingness from people to help each other, which was amazing. And I think this thing came up about looking at the downward drift in individual giving and the very low percentage of that being to culture. Wondering, could there be a national campaign for arts giving? That came up in many cases. But there we go. That's just a walking tour, a very quick zoom through, and we'll get to discuss it in a bit more detail. I'm seeing questions. That's brilliant. Really happy that there are questions. Please do put more questions. That would be fantastic. And now I think I'm going to ask Sarah and Rosa to join me for the panel. Excellent. Make sure that you're unmuted. Yeah. Your reactions. I know you've read the report already. I know Sarah was very involved in writing the report, but also Rosa, you contributed a lot. But perhaps a few months of not reading it for a while. What are your first impressions?
Rosa, do you want to go first?
Yes, okay. Yeah, I found it an incredibly interesting read, and I think for me, I'm executive director of a cultural organisation in Wiltshire, and had just recently joined from another organisation in Bristol, so two quite different contexts. I found it both reassuring, worrying, but reassuring, because I do think fundraising can feel like quite an isolating place, and actually having this sector understanding is very, very helpful, both in communicating to your staff internally, but also, supporting your team about what they should be focusing on. So yeah, I found it very useful. Lots of highlights.
Thank you. And Sarah, what was your coming back to this, as you and I both are?
Thanks. So I'm a middle-aged white woman with blonde hair and a brightly coloured necklace. I think I'm going to approach from the Michael Mosley just one thing. If you did just one thing as a result of reading this report, what I would say it's good for is attention versus potential. So using the slices by size of organisation to look at what is the average for your size of entity of the mix between these income types. And if you use that to compare against what you're achieving at the moment, then to say, where's the headroom in this? Where's the potential for growth? So one of the things that I notice when I think about people saying, well, we'll increase from donations, is that if the average income from donations is small for your type of business model and your size band, then where is the potential for growth? There's no point putting 70% of your effort into something that might, if you're lucky, increase by 1%. I'm not meaning to be facetious, I'm just meaning to sort of extrapolate a point and say, where is it worth putting attention?
And this picking up on this particular bit about the trusts and foundations, where we had some online comment on LinkedIn when we were launching and commenting on the report, and people's experience being, this is really hard. I'm being turned down. There's so much more competition. And yet the data was looking like the overall value was going up. And I see even there's one of the questions about looking for a grant and finding that it was actually closed early due to competition. But Rosa, what's your experience?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And my experience of working with trust foundations is that over the last, I mean, particularly the last 5 years, they themselves, I mean, many of them were very professional, but even the smaller ones have sought more data, more stringent grant processes, and more professional, if I can say that, process. And I think what's also happened is the larger givers who would be giving, you know, the vast percentage, if we were able to do an analysis of that, who was giving out the large sums, have themselves understood that long-term relationships with cultural organisations is how you deliver real benefit. So it used to be that the cycle was every year you put an application into, say, Garfield Weston or Paul Hanlon Foundation, but that those funders now seek to have 3-4 year relationships with funders or launching schemes. So the sums coming out are larger, but they are more difficult to get. And you absolutely, speaking to the point that you said, you know, what are the barriers to raising funds, is if your strategy isn't clear, if you don't understand really, or you could have a really beautiful little project, but if it's not, the impacts aren't clearly understood, and you don't know really what your, you know, the long-term growth of that program, it's difficult to generate really large sums of money. So yeah, I think it's the professionalization of that sector, particularly trusts and foundations.
Yeah. I have to say I've had direct experience myself in raising money of that kind.
Yeah.
In terms of devolution, there's been a lot of noise about devolution and kind of thoughts of how that can affect cultural funding and cultural sector. So what do we think about that and how that affects not just what funding is available, but perhaps how we relate the funding ask to place and placemaking?
We've had some really interesting conversations on this topic recently, that with hugely varied responses. So just to pick a couple of these, we've been doing some work in the middle of the country where we've worked in an area that currently isn't seeing a lot of funding coming to it. It's a fairly sparsely populated area, and there is a prospect of it being absorbed into a combined authority of one level or another. And the fear is that if on average for a large area funding's not bad, actually you will become less visible if in your patch, your art form, your type of work, you've seen less than average levels of funding. So the risk is that whether it's through deprivation, whether it's through lack of built assets, whether it's for whatever reason, if there's been less money coming into your area, the risk is you might become less visible when aggregated into a larger area. So that average will disguise low funding in some places.
And the great risk in devolution as well is the politicization of culture. You are at a local authority level, or even a devolved wider authority level. You would be, yes, we're on a 4-year cycle, say taking the national portfolio investments. Yes, there's a sort of a 3-year cycle, but you would be on a political cycle and have changing relationships, changing strategies. I know myself from from both organisations that I've worked with recently. That's been hugely impactful change of administration in terms of the impact of your grants, the local authority grants. I just also think, I know for some organisations it's an existential threat. They receive funding from multiple, delivering a wide remit across a huge area. They're delivering across multiple areas, all combined in. There's no way they would retain all of those relationships and all of those impacts. I mean, that's sort of what you're saying, Sarah, as well, that you become it's a large number that's easily eroded rather than multiple, a more diversified income base then for some of those organisations that are receiving income across multiple local authorities.
So I think the piece that goes with that is this idea of understanding where the money's not going as well as where it is going. It's relatively easy to look at the data on where money has gone to. It is harder to identify gaps in funding, gaps by place. Typically funders know a lot about who they do fund. It's often harder to have an equivalent level of knowledge about who you're not funding. And yet it's really important that we do that, because, whether that's change in the sector overall or churn, or just this sense of making sure that we don't just concentrate into a small number of entities, that we continue to support the diversity of practice and audiences.
It makes me think that the trusts and foundations, some of them will have a map and know where everything went, but I'm pretty much guessing that if you sat them all in a room together, and some of them may be here today, and indeed they probably do sit in a room every so often, but they wouldn't have a map which was all of their funding, and that's what affects the sector. The sector is affected by the kind of total of course of the public, the trusts and foundations, and the other sources, but certainly we don't have that aggregate view, and at the moment it's like the local authorities that do have the resources to pull together that aggregate view and then have an advantage because they have a kind of knowledge advantage. They know better what's going on.
I suppose that what that's assuming, I mean, and we have wonderful relationships with our local authorities here, but it's assuming as well in a huge local authority structure that there is interest in culture. That's my great fear. At a very, very practical level, we're assuming that there is interest, and it's also on a very practical level, it's capacity, so that as organizations, we, as a chief executive of an organization, the public affairs brief, it can't continue to just get larger and larger and larger. Already it's the work of fundraising, I think, is the piece that we don't often have a chance to talk about. The sheer administrative load of raising funds from a £5 to £1 million is an immense administrative load, and actually devolution would at the moment we have a reasonably straightforward. It's complex, with our Arts Council relationships, but it's a known structure. You can plan with it to an extent, but I think that would be it would take all opportunities of planning would be much less. That's my great fear, just a really practical one.
There's quite a lot of comment about wanting to have greater support, enjoying even those little workshops that we run for the research, people really valuing that kind of interaction. These ideas of having advisory boards so that you can kind of pull in extra advice, and typically those people tend to have some connections as well. It's not just the advice. So where do you both think the resourcing, kind of skilling, and just having enough bandwidth, where should that go? Is there anything that you've seen work really well, or anything you think should happen? Sarah?
You want to go, Sarah?
I think one of the questions I would ask is, which of these activities need to be the basis of a collaboration? So the sorts of work that I do day in, day out, looking at data, doing the analysis, looking at where money is and isn't going to, coming from, etc. I think it would be hard to make the case that that should be done individually in every organization. It's a large piece of work. It's a burden if you do it individually. So what's the shared capacity for that? You know, some of the sorts of things that we see happening in geographic clusters, the work in Culture Central, some of the work up in Tyne in the Northeast, where you've got these aggregate pieces of analysis. How do we do that stuff? Because there's never going to be a data scientist in every organization. And it would be slightly facetious if I said large organizations obviously have more capacity than small ones. I don't think it's obvious at all. But the kind of, what's the shared capacity for that analysis, and how do we bring it together so that small and large across different art forms, everyone has access to it? I think that would be my question.
I think mine, and picking up your point around advisory groups, Patrick, and some of these other ways that organisations are looking to think creatively. The big piece that makes me think, and that speaks to the question, or one of the comments that Sarah made earlier about what was the one finding, the one thing the thing that I reflected of is how important leadership, understanding of fundraising is at leadership level. And I know we say that a lot, you know, at board level, of course, but if the person who is the line managing the development function doesn't understand how difficult it is, and then it's about you know, being able to speak with authority, understanding the difficulties of the processes of raising income from private sources, that is, you know, is a key point. So upskilling that sector as much as possible, and I know there's organizations, and absolutely that's what Cause For does, but then the advisory group, that also requires clear leadership, because often that's a group of volunteers, many of whom don't really feel comfortable with the idea of fundraising, although they can be drawn around a story of fundraising and guided towards it. But yes, it does need that person who is the bridge between the advisory group, the board, and the team, the development team, to really understand it.
Okay, yeah. And switching topics slightly, the whole area of EDI, diversity inclusion, feels like 3 years ago would have been, I don't know what the word is, not very controversial. It would be obvious that a lot of funding would be for that, because that's what the market doesn't necessarily provide. But we definitely had some evidence to show that some people are having to shift their ask away from that. It isn't that their organizational mission doesn't still have that in, but that doesn't work so well as an explicit ask in some cases. I don't know what your thought on this, and definitely that I know, and Sarah, maybe you can comment first, Rosa, but then Sarah, there is the whole other question about the lack of evidence, but maybe Rosa first.
Yes, and I mean, I would agree with this. It's profoundly dispiriting. We at Bristol Beacon started off sort of staunchly with a program around inclusive excellence for our capital project, and we found the funds to raise for that thing, other than through statutory funds, interestingly, very, very difficult. But there are some stunning examples across the country of organisations who are putting EDI at the centre of everything they do, and who link that work with wonderful qualities such as Para Orchestra, I'm thinking of, who it's about sort of a very, very strong cultural experience, as well as they're inextricably linked, is what I'm trying to say. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm noting that it absolutely is something I've experienced. I think going back to the trusts and foundations, especially the larger ones, absolutely are still funding this work. But once again, as said before, without the evidence, which Sarah's going to talk about, the evidence of track record and the evidence of a proper programme, it's difficult to access those funds because they're wanting to work in a very strategic way with few organisations. So I think it's just about being very considered. It's about really understanding it is not a tick box, as for many organizations still for them EDI is not fully integrated into purpose and structure. Then that's how to approach it. But yeah, it's very disappointing that it's harder than it was.
So if I look at this just from a kind of what data do I have available to me to do any sort of analysis around EDI, I think there are some positives I can point to. So, for example, the growth and development of the DEI data standard that is being used by the Association of Charitable Funders, and that panel of about 100 trusts and foundations that are involved each year in it. Hurrah! That is a good development, and we can reasonably expect that will continue. In work that we've been doing up in Leeds, we can see that the importance of looking at this at a council level and across the third sector absolutely embedded. The challenge that I face when dealing with a data set, whether it's 3,500 or 7,500 organisations, is that as it stands at the moment, we haven't had, or certainly for use in this report, we didn't have sufficient data that we could run at scale in this piece of work on a consistent method all the way through in the way that we did have it for the financial data. Have I got plans to change that? Yeah, you bet I have. And with colleagues at ESSEC, there's work underway that we would seek to deploy in future pieces. So having something that's got a consistent method that can be deployed at scale, ideally, I love a survey. Surveys are brilliant for detail and granularity. And, you can see that work going on in the sort of evidence and impact piece with funders, but I want something I can deploy relatively light touch across as many organisations as possible. And there's nothing that sits in the Charity Commission data, nothing in the Companies House data. So what are we going to do about it? And personally, I'm looking for something that is, I'm going to set the bar low, better than not having it. I'm not looking for the perfect definition of this. I'm not looking for the most sophisticated deployment. I'm looking for something that gives me a range of results that I feel is robust enough to get us started. So it's not that my bar is low, it's just I want to get on with it. So what do we do that implements something?
Some evidence on diversity would be better than the current state. Okay, we've got 1 minute left because we're going to stick to time. So you've both got 30 seconds. I'm handing you your magic wand, Rosa. What would you want trusts and foundations or Arts Council or other funders or the rest of the sector to do? You've got your magic wand. What as a result of the research?
As a result of the research, well, just more broadly, I'd love them to lean into to encourage organisations to really spend time thinking about their purpose and their goal, their mission, and then support organisations to create that, because the carving off of lots of different things is difficult for the organisations and it's difficult for the funders. We want organisations where there's big, strong direction, and money can flow behind big ideas. It's hard to do, but investment in that space is money well spent.
And Sarah, your magic wand?
My magic wand is, I don't care about the best in class. I care about, is it working for the average organisation? I'd rather we moved the middle of that bell curve, 5% towards resilience, than we had glorious best in class case studies.
There we go.
Feel free to disagree.
On that note, we will have a short break and we will come back precisely at midday. See everyone back.
Hello, everyone. It is just gone noon. So if you could start filtering back. Our next bit on the agenda is to be talking a little bit about one of the case studies from the report. We actually did 6 of them. They're in a separate document from the main report, but I do recommend them to you because, as you will know, if you saw the charts and the slides already, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of information and complexity in the report, and we wanted it to be something that actually talks as well about individual experiences of organizations, what they're doing well, that can be an inspiration, but also a little bit warts and all, not just the glorious best in class, but what they're struggling with. We are very privileged to have here today Michelle, whose organization was the subject of one of the case studies. Michelle is an actress and a singer and a founder of The World Reimagined. Welcome, Michelle. Would you be willing to start off by talking a little bit about why and how you founded The World Reimagined and the work that it does?
Yes, The World Reimagined was founded on a conversation that I had with a white person who I had just met that day. Funnily enough, we had this very light conversation about transatlantic slavery. And the point that he made to me was that as he was half German and half South African, he said, even though it wasn't perfect, those two nations at least addressed their wrongs publicly and tried to do something about it. Whereas he felt that Britain still hadn't had that very reflective conversation on transatlantic slavery, meaning what Britain earned from it, the repercussions that are still present today. He seemed, what came across most was that Britain owned ending slavery, but not everything that came before that. And that really resonated with me. One reason, because it was a conversation I'd had, but only ever had with Black people. So family members, friends that I had, it was something that the Black community often said. What resonated with me, it was the first time I'd ever heard a white person say that to me. And I felt that, well, I just met you today and we're having this conversation. It's a challenging topic, but we're not in any way speaking in challenging tones. We're actually learning from each other. And we felt what could happen if we could replicate that conversation across the country. That wasn't a finger pointing exercise. It wasn't something to be angry about it in our presentation. It was much more something for us to present truthfully and allow people to come to the conversation and discover things and discover how they feel about knowing the truth. And so we felt that art would be the best way to do that. So we very much focus on our art education projects to achieve racial harmony and social cohesion. So the point for us is about allowing people to learn about our historical and cultural connections. And that first phase was about transatlantic slavery, so that people could know the repercussions that are still present today, but also the things that connect us because of transatlantic slavery. And then we felt for our second phase, we should very much concentrate on the now, these relationships that were established because of slavery, relationships across the transatlantic, namely West Africa and the Caribbean, which are now Commonwealth countries. Our initial relationship as Britain with those countries was enslavement, but now it's something else. And so we wanted to look at those for the second phase, to look at those relationships as they are now and progress them. So with our learning program, for instance, our first phase looks at owning your own identity. And so children, the pupils, will have an intergenerational conversation with a member of their family and learn about their own heritage and have pride in their own heritage, whatever that may be, because all these different heritages and cultures contribute to the Britain we know today. And then our geography program then joins a school with one in either West Africa or the Caribbean. And it's it's always in regions that experience climate change. They're dealing with the real life effects of it. So that therefore we now humanize climate change, because these schools and these pupils will be making relationships with students that are going through it.
Thank you. I know that contributed income is a significant part of your business model. So would you be able to talk a little bit about that journey for you and, in a sense, how that experience of raising donations, funding has changed over time?
So for us, we mainly, if I'm honest, got money. We started before George Floyd. But when George Floyd happened, people wanted to put money somewhere. They wanted something, a big idea, as you speak about, something that could show their commitment to racial justice. And so they very quickly felt that a lot of people felt that our program aligned with what their desires were. And so we've got funding from public funding as well as contributed funding. But to be honest with you, we didn't get donations. We didn't even have a donation tab on our website for 3 years, right? Because most of our funding came from corporates for sponsorship, local authorities, and then public funding. So we did have that mixed income funding, and it was very, very balanced, I would say, a very balanced showing. And we felt very well supported in that sense that we could do this. We raised over £3 million doing that for this mixed income funding. That's changed a lot. And we've noticed with our second phase that there's a lot more caution when you talk about race. People, especially corporates, because most of the corporates we dealt with, they have a head office in the USA. As Donald Trump came in and started revising DEI, a lot of those corporations then said, we're going to put a pin in that for a moment and have a look at the climate. And so this second phase has done well because our learning program has been funded by C of E, and we're providing a service for them for their schools. And that's a 3-year program, which will involve some of the things I talked about, that looking at their own heritage and identity, looking at those relationships transatlantically, but also those children will then have public displays. So it means that while the children have this conversation in the city, they then put it on public display within the city. So we bring the wider community into the conversation. And so C of E really felt that they wanted cathedrals to become the focal point for social cohesion now, to bring everyone out. And so this project particularly chimed with them. So because it was right project at the right time, we find now that as part of our program, which we call the Triangle of Unity, 20% of it is public funding now, whereas 75% is basically from this providing the service, and very small amount is contributed income from donations and individuals, trusts and foundations. It was interesting hearing, was it Claire saying or Rose? It was very interesting saying about how hard it is to get money from trusts and foundations. Because our projects, the way we cost them, we don't put in loads of core funding, because we assume that we could go to trusts and foundations to get core funding, and it's almost impossible. And what we realize now is with our strategy is, because this is a 3-year program, our approach is to, we have enough money to do the program, is allow people to see it live, see it happening. And when those displays are come out in January, we now feel that that would be the time to go to trusts and foundations with the evidence, as Rosa was pointing out, of the impact. So we definitely felt what you were saying, Rosa, that because it was a new idea and we couldn't evidence it, we couldn't get funding.
It's a very interesting story, and I think you've had quite a journey already, even though the organization hasn't been around for a while. In conclusion, are there any sort of lessons that you think other organizations should learn from your experience? You're still learning as well, obviously.
Yes, we're still learning, but we do feel that the ability to pivot are some of the things that you pointed out, and just say your wording and your framing, you still have your mission, but the ability to recontextualize it and have it appeal to people who have funds is really important. And that's a conversation with your board, because you have your mission statement and that has to remain. And it's just, how do you diversify that mission in a way that keeps to your goal, but can still appeal to ways you can raise funds?
Thanks so much, Michelle. That was very helpful, and we will keep you around for the Q&A. I think we're going to bring our panel participants and Patrick back into the spotlight circle now, so that we can address your questions. If you have more questions, please keep them coming. We do have time. We might also want Helen and Claire Titley to join us, I think, because some might be to them. Patrick, I know people have been answering questions already, but we may want to revisit some of those in discussion. I don't know if you have one you want to start off with.
Claire and I have been typing away, answering things, but the questions have been really, really interesting.
I might just highlight to start off with the first one that we had, if that's all right.
By all means.
Which was that all the data on expenditure against income suggests that cost disease is in full play and will continue to have a detrimental effect on the sustainability of the sector. But this doesn't seem to have been a main focus of the report in terms of the economic force of that. And so the question is this something that is being tracked or reported against elsewhere? I think that is a very good question. And I will say in the report, there are so many aspects of the cultural sector that this touches on. We had to keep restraining ourselves. There was another report about business models. There was another report about cost and inflation. And we were very conscious that we couldn't do it all. But I think Sarah might be able to have a few thoughts about how that cost inflation is being tracked, or maybe should be tracked in the future.
Sure, happy to kick off on that one. So you're absolutely right that we need to track income, cost, the extent to which there is or is not a surplus. And in an ideal world, I'd want to know what working capital levels were like as well. So there are multiple pieces of data that broadly will come out of sets of annual accounts, the NPO annual returns. So I would say there's a list of half a dozen data points that if we know nothing else, we know those things in association with the profile of organizations, what sector. If we know their income, we know what their size band is, we'll know where they are in the country. Minimum number of data points that would then allow more of this slice and dice to be done in the future, coupled with the income models that we have. So could you carry on doing this? Yes, you could. Does it matter that we track cost as well as income? You bet it does. And the patterns in that surplus or loss making, we're also seeing those vary according to what the income model is, according to the size of organization. So it will continue to matter that we can slice and dice it in an assortment of ways. And if I was waving a magic wand, of course, I'm going to say I would want to keep this cohort going. I'd ideally want to keep it going for these 7,000-ish organizations so that we can look beyond the regularly funded. We can look beyond into the sort of newer organizations as well as those who've been around for a long time. So yeah, I'd keep that going if it were me. And you're right, Sophia, the focus of this work was the private investment. We could totally pivot this into looking at income and business models, profitability, working capital.
So I think I'm going to pass to Helen in a minute. This was an innovation, and you mentioned about new things in the research. So this is one of the things that we suggested, not least because of the higher inflation environment for this period. And so, or Helen or Claire, we put in these costs and profitability things to provide comparison for what the contributed income was helping to do to the overall financial situation of the organizations. I mean, you haven't had that data before. What was your reaction to it, and how might it be used? But maybe Helen first, if you like.
Claire, I think you were looking to come in.
Oh, sorry, Claire.
That's okay. Helen and I can both contribute. I think one of the key areas for me is the period of the research doesn't actually bring us up to the present day. We always, and that's a problem with research in terms of, you know, the availability of data and up-to-date data, and obviously there is that lag in financial years. And what we have seen is the national insurance increases come into play in April this year, and so I think that will be an interesting area to explore and see how that impacts on the sector. We are tracking income expenditure through our national portfolio organisations. That's done on an annual return basis, as some of the audience joining us today will know. But I think it is an interesting area to explore the wider sector, because every organisation is unique, and when you have that data set, then you can understand, you know, what are the trends. We can't help every individual organisation on a one-to-one basis, but are there things that can help collectively the sector? Helen, I don't know if you want to add anything further.
I think there's that aspect of every organisation and the people working in them being unique, which is so important, and how they connect with their communities, wherever they might be. They might be in their immediate surroundings, or they might be international and global audiences. So I think there's something around that, and making that connectivity that's most relevant and most appropriate in a really bespoke way for that particular organisation. And that's really challenging, but it is part of the beauty, the complexity and the diversity of our sector, which I think is amazing. I also just wanted to highlight two things, and I think it was in relation to the Sky Arts Awards this week that Bill Bailey was talking about how the economic value of our sector is huge. His article I read said it's 126 billion per year that comes into the economy, which is bigger than football. So we should value it really, really greatly. We should track it, we should monitor it, and we should be doing more research of this kind. And I also wanted to highlight on Arts Council England's website the Culture and Place Data Explorer, which shows where you can generate a multitude of reports across different places, and that shows where the income gaps or areas of investment might be. So I recommend that to you.
Brilliant. I know personally, I was sat in Ottawa at a conference with Arts Council Canada presenting, and because in Canada they have a single system for financial information, whether you're funded by federal, state or city level, and the person was then able to give a picture of the resilience of the orchestra sector as of the last year end. And it was like, wow, we should really be able to do that, but we're not currently able to do that. So that's kind of one of our topics for this panel is actually just what else should be done, or what additional research should be available. There were comments around kind of capacity and working with trusts and foundations. I know, Sarah, you and I have talked about this kind of attributing the cost of fundraising very carefully to different fundraising streams, so that you can see which things kind of actually cost less to raise than the money you raise. But are there other thoughts that people have on that topic of particularly those very competed trusts and foundations?
I can come in on that, and then maybe
Yeah.
Rosa, did you want to start from your
No,
direct experience?
you start, Claire, you start.
Okay. So I was reflecting on, just as we said, organisations are unique, trusts and foundations are unique, and they will have a founding document that sets out what the settler of that trust and foundation, what they want to support, and the trustees at the time, they have to follow through on that mission. And as some speakers have said before, you know, there are some organisations that have put in processes and have strategies and are working more in that strategic space. However, there are many trusts and foundations that are still under-resourced themselves, and they have to manage their business models accordingly. I think for what we have seen in terms of capacity, we have seen a greater number of collaborations, and I referenced that in one of the answers to the questions, and whether that's working in partnership on particular programs with others to then sort of bring together that collaboration and capacity to raise funds, or in place as well. So I referenced at the start that we support figurative fundraising in for arts and culture, which is really exploring how to support organisations on the ground in a place to collaborate and gain greater funding. And they've had some real success in places like Sunderland, in Stoke-on-Trent, where the levels of funding that are being raised are so much greater than if individual organisations were just working on their own programs. So kind of getting rid of that barrier of competition and seeing where the synergies are to be able to maximise that income. And also just to say, individuals is a crucial part of the mix, and there are many more individuals than there are trusts and foundations. And I know that for some organisations, being able to write a bid into a trust and foundation is a lot less capacity than building relationships with individuals. But I do see that those organisations that invest in building their relationships, having their donation button on their websites, building their case for support, building their audience to take them on that journey behind a big vision or ambition, are reaping those rewards as well. Rosa, did you want to come in with some direct experience?
Yes, and I would say on both of those points, so I'm going to pick up exactly where you've left off, but combine it with the comment on trusts and foundations. I think the other thing that we are seeing in the sector is that as individual givers are becoming, some are becoming more sophisticated in what they want to give, and some indeed are setting up trusts and foundations of their own, that they are wanting a much richer relationship with the organizations they're giving to. And so yes, it looks like the pot's getting bigger and why can't I get access to it, but actually it is very much about relationships with individuals who set up trusts. There's huge opportunities there though, and it comes back to the point I was making earlier about individuals. I mean, I completely agree with Claire. I do think it feels like and particularly for perhaps inexperienced board to think, well, trusts and foundations is the answer. But I think very much as Claire does, that the opportunity really lies in individual giving, even at all levels, from the community giving through to the high net worth individuals. But it's recognizing, as I said earlier, the sheer amount of work that requires, and actually it is incredibly process oriented. And I think in some ways learning more about the process of individual giving can feel releasing, that actually it's not just that somebody's got a particularly sparkling personality and has the ability to ask. It's that they have done quite a lot of work over many months and found out that person, researched them and invited them in and got the right person to ask. It doesn't even need to be that. So yes, I do think for organisations, individual giving should be something that where you look and look again. That's all I have to say about that. Very
good. And I'm just aware that we're on the edge of finishing up. There's a question from Catherine about kind of economic impacts, but also the kind of measures of social impact. And then multiple times today and in the research for the report, people said that impact data needs to get better to support the argument, the ask. What about better evidence? What about a more concerted campaign maybe between the government funders, the trusts and foundation funders, and the sector bodies to speak directly to the public to help the weather of the individual fundraising be an easier kind of weather. Because there are many examples for sport, for instance, which have not happened in arts and culture. What final word from those who haven't just spoken? Maybe Michelle.
Sorry, just reading one in the questions.
Yes.
What were you asking? What did you want to know?
I think there is this idea of what could we do to make that individual, following on from what Rosa and Claire were saying, to make the individual fundraising easier, because there is this idea of doing more national campaign towards that, because there has been so much noise post Olympics or pre-Olympics about sport, less noise about culture.
I think that Helen just made the perfect point. I would never have expected arts and culture to earn more than football, right? Everyone sees football as a huge earning segment of British society, and we are not shouting from the rooftops enough. And I think that is the way to do it. Talk about the impact, talk about bringing people together. Now more than ever, we need to bring people together and see how connected we actually are. And arts has the power to do that. Storytelling has the power to do that. You only need to look at the TV show look at adolescence, look at the TV show about the post office to see the impact one show can make for a country. So we really need to own that, really sing about the power of arts to everyone. And yes, I would support a national campaign, absolutely.
And I'm afraid, I'm sure everyone has a view, but at 27 minutes past, we're on a bound to make sure that you walk out the door on time. So this is very unfair, Sophia. Do you have any final thoughts yourself, having edited much of the report and prepared for today? What do we reflect on today's session?
It's been an absolutely fascinating process working on this, and we want to thank everybody who participated in the workshops, the interviews, the case studies, because I certainly have learned a lot. I think we really do have to reflect the challenges that many organizations feel, and I think it's important to say that in the midst of all this statistics, organizations are working harder than ever to stay where they are effectively, and they are doing a brilliant job of staying where they are. So really, I think the next step for us is to think about where to go. Arts Council is already offering a great deal of support, thinking about ways to offer more support, but that kind of networking and sharing of insight that we saw happening in the workshops that we ran, we also just saw how hungry people were for that. And so I think really the next step, the research suggests that the next step is to think about ways to build on the experience and the knowledge that are already there and the great job that the sector is already doing, and just make sure that that knowledge and ways of working is spread more broadly. So I think that's what it comes down to for me. Thank you all so much for being part of this. It's been great. It's been a wonderful journey. We appreciate your help. You can, if you have more questions. I know we've had a few questions today, but if anyone has more follow-up questions, please feel free to email us and we can answer those or put you in touch with somebody who can. Patrick, do you have anything last moments you want to add?
Someone's asked me to share the LinkedIn post I mentioned around it was around philanthropic fundraising. What I'll do is I'll repost it on my LinkedIn, and it's easy to find me because no one has called my name. So I'll try and do that now while I remember. Yeah. But no, the same. Thanks very much. Thank you very much to Nina and colleagues for organising, Arts Council colleagues, all the panellists, Sarah, who works with us all the time on these very difficult and complex data projects. And thank you for all of your questions and contributions. Rosa, Michelle, thank you. It's been brilliant, and to the interpreters as well.